I have no idea if this works. Guys, we are potentially live on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube right now. We're gonna see
Sweet.
how this all works out. That's what could go wrong. What could go wrong. But yeah, I got my hard root beer here. I applied to be a Celsius brand ambassador yesterday. Because why not? Because I just drink the mess out of this stuff. So hashtag Celsius. We'll do that. But I'm all ready to go. But all right, y'all, dudes, we're just gonna like this is the thing we've the three of us have been talking about doing this for a little bit,
Yeah.
because we can look on some of the other platforms and see if we're getting any questions or anything like that. But if you're ready for it, I'm talking to the listeners out there. You're just gonna hear the three of us kind of riff on whatever we feel like talking about for the next hour, hour and a half or so. Maybe 45 minutes to an hour and a half. We'll see how it goes. But yeah, so I know Zero. I'm wearing my sweet vintage Air Force Academy shirt. You're down there for your AOC, down in Daytona Beach for your AOC's retirement.
100%. Yeah. So I had an absolute American hero down here. NASCAR Dayton is retiring after 30 years of service, and he's the Embry Riddle. He wouldn't mind me sharing this. He's the Embry Riddle ROTC commander down here, and we're all flew in. A bunch of our guys from our. This is how much this guy means to me. We all flew down here to make sure that we could go send him off right. I do think, and this is a serious notion. I think he's going to try and take over like a Chick-fil-A after this, and just make the ultimate retirement bank. That's what's going to go on. Or he's going to be. He might be an intel analyst for the NASCAR Cup Series, which I'm really hoping that that's what happens for him. So down here
Yes.
enjoying Daytona, and it's awesome that that you get to run into some of your get to keep that relationship with some of the people who mean a lot to you. And he probably doesn't even know how much he means to me from the influence he's
Oh, dude.
had. So it's awesome.
Well, I think I said it on a podcast before that my AOC of the Academy, I did not appreciate him when we were there. I just thought he was kind of a hard ass. Warning Wood, Paul Wood. Um, he was a B1 patch. And, like, I didn't even know what weapon school was when I was going through, but he had this black border patch on, and I was just like, oh, I bet you're so cool. Because he was like talking about, he's like, hey, when I was at the weapon school, yada yada yada. And then it took me like 2 years after I graduated to just be like, yeah, I should have just been sitting in that dude's office. But,
Picking
but
up what he's putting down. Oh, yeah. I
lost
was. I
lost
was.
opportunity.
I think. Yeah. I think that there's something to be said about the leader who can identify, especially when the member is really young and stupid, which I definitely was at the time, and he was able to like see that there was like I can see potential in people, but there's a barrier to entry there. I certainly was not above that barrier to entry.
Yeah.
So
No, that's cool. Well, all right. We were kind of talking this morning about some weapon school stories, some of the funny ones. For the weapon school, like us in the 19th, we talked about it the last on your guys' episode, which dropped was wild success. You guys crushed it. A lot of good clips that have come from that, and a lot of good viewers. But we were talking about just the interaction between us and the 19th, the Intel Weapon School, the Rustics. So to the Rustics for that. But some of the stories that just come out of this stuff is absolutely hilarious. The one I was going to talk about was you guys. I think you just absolutely haze your students, and you make them just never sleep. They don't sleep because they don't have crew rest. It's the hardest weapon school on your sleep and your mental health, in my in my opinion. But I just remember the one time we were in a CSAR bowl, so search and rescue bowl. Pinch Vincent was telling me about this that Jammer was the A10 wug, and we're there, and Jammer's just like, hey, the SA-17 system or insert system here is like, that's going to be a hard stop for us. We need to be able to kill that thing. And she was like, to the Intel, I can't remember who the Intel wug was at the time, but it was like, where is that thing at? And it's like, unknowable information. Unknowable information on like where these systems are. And it seems like we go through weapon school and we just are like, hey, we have no capability to find things in the military or in the United States of space. We don't know where anything is at. We can't kill it. It's always going to be there, and you're just going to have to figure it out like when you're actually airborne. and we all know that to not be the case. And so I was just tired of it, and I can't remember who the IP was. I just go, if you can go on whatever system you use and find me that system that was great, that like in the last couple days, I'm gonna tell you exactly where it is, and Jammer will laser kill it 3 minutes into the bowl. And the 19th IOR looked at me with such utter disdain because I was just like, yeah, just go do your thing. The woke was like, oh my god, I get to actually do Intel things. Ran back, came back, and there's like, this was from 20 minutes ago, and just like dropped it on the table, and it was like, hey, here's an Ellipse. This thing is right here. Here's a picture of it. We got a picture of it. It's awesome. And Jammer was pumped, but I think that day was the IOR for the 19th was just like, hey, we haven't gotten to the point where we actually care about our students yet, so we wanted you to kind of make them work for it a little bit more than that. But that was one of the ones that was just like they actually got to do Intel things for that one. But you guys hated me a little bit towards the end because I just stopped caring.
The Flash, I will say, I think that the level of haze is a spectrum. You know, there's the spectrum where you can get to that point where you're in the Buffalo Bill stage of haze to the student, where you make them put the lotion on their skin or else they get the hose again. And there is something to be said though about the scenario you brought up, because the Intel student is often in this weird role where they have to, because one thing is like the Intel events take place before the mission planning events, multiple hours prior to. And so you're right,
Yeah.
the sleep ins are definitely a feature where you would generally hit your stride 3 to 4 months in, but you're generally sleeping 4 hours a night, 7 days a week for the duration of 6 months. With some days you get a lot more than others, but if you're in a really rough patch, it's 4 to 5 hours a night, or you're pushing through all night.
4 to 5 is generous sometimes.
Generous. I was on a 4 monster a day habit. I had some black market Jack 3D. There was a lot of things that were in the caffeinated repository for me. So the thing that I'll say is that the Intel student often becomes, for lack of a better term, a dungeon master for both realism and what's fake when you end up running your scenarios, right? And so oftentimes we put them in this weird state of limbo. We're like, yeah, and what you did was the absolute right thing. If you can demonstrate that you could find this thing in the real world, that should get you credit. But oftentimes the training of everybody else is dependent upon the Intel analyst looking like an idiot. And so in order to make the pilots look like have them be to solve the harder problems sometimes and be athletes there, the Intel guy has to say like, oh well, I can't find it for you because it's not built in our little Dungeons and Dragons scenario here.
Exactly. Exactly.
You
guys have no idea. Like, I just wanted to like take the cuffs off and just be like, I want these guys to know like the absolute killers that these guys can be for you.
Hey,
and that's all I wanted at the end.
A little excursion here. This is some scar tissue from whenever I was a WUG, which was a very long time ago. But so you might remember this IOR's name. His call sign was Nooner. He was with the A-10s, and so before I was a student, I worked in a unit where I have driven on. I used to build search plans for where all of the Scud decoys would go, and I've driven every inch of range road in Nevada, and I was very familiar with it. And so I'm trying to be a bro and help everyone out, and I'm in a Wizent MPC for a CSAR Vol, and our bro Kelso Flick, when he was a WUG, he was leading that MPC. Along with Tron, who was a HH60 bro also. And I'm sitting there, and in my prep for it, I know the SA6 is going to break this scenario, so I need to find it. Well, I've got some familiarity with these roads, and so I start pulling up imagery, and I'm like, I can just find this thing. And I think I'm doing everybody a solid. well, I know how to generate Cat 1 chords too. So I go ahead and I generate Cat 1 chords for the spot on the range. And I'm briefing at the kickoff for the MPC, and I'm telling everybody, and I'm looking right across the table at Kelso, and Kelso's just like, we're going to win. Like, this is great. I knew this is my main problem, and they've already found it. They already have Cat 1 chords. And I'm like, here you go. Here's the solution. And I was also having like a nightmare in my own head. I could not say battalion. I kept saying battery every time I needed to say it. And my IOR, whose name his Cold Cuts, would scream at me while I'm briefing the meeting. Every time I would say battery, he'd go battalion, and I would just go. I would just lock up for a second, and so, but I get through it, and all the wugs are like, "We're gonna win. I'm glad you found that thing." And then immediately, I've never seen Nooner before. He walks over, grabs my notebook, and grabs my image because I made a nice little JDPI graphic of it. He goes, "Get over here!" And now I'm having a huddle. I think it's a huddle. It's me, Cole, and Nooner, and I still haven't caught on that I've done something horrible. And it just turns into Nooner is just lecturing me about you blew up my scenario. This is going to be the main DFP for all this stuff. He's like, there's no way those coordinates are going to be good. And he hands them to Cold, and Cold, I now know from instructing, Cold has the cheat sheet with the real chords, and then he has my chords. And he's like, Cold, those probably aren't even close, are they? And he's looking at them, and Cold just starts laughing, and he puts them down, and he's like, it's the sight, it's like 2 feet. He's like, it's like 2 feet off, he kind of found it. And then Nooner just looks me dead in the eyes. We have like 5 minutes before the next meeting starts. That's how long this thing has gone. And he just goes, and the whole time, like, RFIs for me are just stacking up. And I can't answer any of them. So the stress level, and I've had 3 hours of sleep maybe, and I'm running off of Cliff Bar's 5-hour energies and Jack. And Nooner just looks at me and he just says, here's what you're going to do at the start of this next meeting. You're going to say, hey guys, I've got new intel, but I need to first let you guys know that those chords I gave you, those are unrealistic. Based off of the mobility timelines, how fast this thing can move, those chords are going to be out of date anyway. And so you're still going to come up with a plan for how we're going to find and fix this thing. And so Kelso's like, we're going to solve it. We're going to win. And then I start the second meeting and I'm like, everything I said is a total lie. I apologize. It's like
nails out, Toad.
Dude, it's like a hostage situation. And yeah. And so I was on the other side of that, but then whenever it was over with, Nooner, as soon as I was done with that explanation, he walks over, he slaps me on the back, and he was just like, that's weapons officer instruction right there. That was good work. And then they went and accomplished the mission. It ended up being exactly where I had it, but they gave me a bunch of injects that I had to play along with, and it just drove everybody way away, and then they naturally found it anyway, but Kelso was kind of like, okay. So I was on the other side of that, and I had somebody inject unrealism from the Flyer side because I was screwing up their whole master plan of how they were going to crush their own wugs. So
you got pulled into the Intel instructor deep state.
Dude,
they just pulled you in. They're like, you better play ball.
Yeah.
Well, like,
yeah, but that was that. But so, and that related to that. That should have been my hint to stop trying to game anything on the range based off of prior knowledge.
No.
But I didn't. And that's when I ran into Shotgun Macaulay. So
that's going to be the next one because like I love the hey, we're not going to give them what we actually think Intel can provide to the warfighter here because we need to make this difficult. We need to make weapons school really hard because it's not hard enough, right? 3 hours, energy drinks, Cliff Bars, and Jack. But then those are the same instructors, maybe myself included, that are just like, kill Mike 90.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
It's not like it's like I have every single SAM site, every single emitter site like memorized, and I'm just like, it's dead, and I use the names because that makes me sound really cool on the radio.
Yeah.
That's always, it's the same dudes there that use their own intelligence to be able to sound super cool on the radio. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, and the thing was, so like what I yeah, I don't know. I like when I went through, I made it still at least sound tactically like, hey guys, I don't know what happened. I blacked out. Look, anyway, here's how we build a plan to try to attack this thing later on, but it's probably not going to work. It was going to work, but
It was gonna work.
And sometimes when even the mission goes perfectly, you're going to find yourself in a very dense debrief where the instructor looks for something they've got to pull out of it. We got to teach these guys something. If they completely dominate the mission, right? You got to go after it. So one of the things that we experienced, this was in a counter CSAR ball. Myself and Great American Hero Blood Diamond and our two students, we get one of those nighttime CSAR balls, and we're over in the A10s, and obviously like the helos are there and everybody else. And there was a guest guard unit from the A10s that were there as well, and a few of our higher ranking officers got that time. Like some of the higher ranking guys were A10 pilots that were on the wing there. You guys can imagine who. And so we run this vol, and it actually goes 100% to plan. The students crush the whole thing. They get the target. They pick the guys up. They pick up Jack. They get everything together. They end up having a few like counter CSAR spoofer guys trying to mess with them, right? We go back to the debrief, and the instructors are sitting there like, "You guys have anything?" And we're all looking at each other like, keep in mind, it's also about 1:00 in the morning. Everybody's exhausted. They all drove down. Like some of the guys look like Pigpen from Charlie Brown. They're covered in dirt and dust from being actually out in the range doing this stuff. And I can't remember who the main instructor was, but eventually they came across, they had to find this one debrief item where there was what could have been a spoofer Jack signal, right? Which they thought at the time was like, oh, this could have been a guy that was just actually dangerous for you. You should have never tried to put on target for that guy. Like you should have never even like gone anywhere close to him. And then it goes, you have to authenticate, right? So then this is where it was like all of a sudden, because we had nothing to talk about for the mission, it was like there was some chum in the water. Because the guy who was tired, it's 1:00, he's like, well, I don't know. I think someone authenticated here. I don't know what happened. And they're like, let's play it back. What was the script? What did he say? And the guy, the spoofer, was this in our minds, this like teenage kid going, "Oh, this is Nighthawk. Is your refrigerator running?" And talking shit on the comm, right? And clearly, then it gets out of control, right? Then the IOR, dead serious face, is like, "That guy could have had a man pads, and you got even close to him. We were trying to you're risking the whole flight." Risking everybody. You could have lost everyone. And this goes on, Flash, I kid you not, for an hour. They go on about like how this is the problem. We then discover, because the guard guys had left early, one of the reps came back, and he's in the throes of this conversation, and he hears the IORs ripping a new one for the flight, essentially like how irresponsible they were. Even I'm telling you, they crushed the mission. How irresponsible they were, because they could have got, in the kill zone of the imaginary guy with the imaginary radio who called himself Nighthawk. And all of a sudden they play back and they're like, oh, wait a minute here. Like, Colonel so-and-so, what did you do? He goes, oh, once I heard that thing, I flipped around and I burped right on him. Took him out in the first 5 seconds. And so like they had been pontificating on this irresponsibility of the flight, when in reality they had mowed down this imaginary, spoofer on the radio. So it's
what a
now
bro.
3:00 in the morning, and that to me was a lesson I learned, that if you didn't find something wrong with the mission, you better figure it out soon and find something quickly to be able to debrief them on. So.
Yeah.
Oh god. Well, that's the thing too. Is like, wouldn't it have been hilarious? Like, because whether they authenticated the spoofer or not, or it's just like, hey, you couldn't authenticate. The number, I gotta tell you, if you held a gun to my head, we talked about this. Me and Kelso have talked about this a lot. But like, if you held a gun to my head and told me, "Hey, what's the second letter of the word of the day?" I'd be like, So, if now we have a bunch of dudes out there just like couldn't figure it out, he's dead.
He's dead. Yeah.
Like, that's gonna be a real problem. Oh god, this brings up a story. So I was a lieutenant, and A-10 lieutenants get told to go be Jack, go be the survivor on like all these CSARs for all the Sandy ones.
Right.
And so they put me out like in the South Georgia woods, and I was given like a very clear set of marching orders on how to run this script. And I'm sure you two are about to be just absolutely shocked. About 5 minutes into the bowl, I went completely off script, and all of a sudden it's just like, hey, can't remember what my IP, like my call sign was, but there was just like Sandy 1, radio check, sorry off, and I was like, hey, it's like, yep, authenticate. I actually had that because I had it on a piece of paper in front of me. And then I was sitting there, and they was like, are there any threats in the area? And I was just like, yeah, there's 20 personnel under that boat across the street, like from me. And they're like, oh God, we're in from the south. And then like I see them like go and do all this different stuff. And from what I gathered in the debrief was just like, I was just making up threats. I was like calling out that these guys, like that I was like on the move. I was like, I'm on the move. I'm going east. And like I actually just like ran across a gas station parking lot with like a ton of people.
Yeah.
And like they're just like watching me on the targeting pod, just like cut up through this. Like I crossed the highway and like all this different stuff. And I just remember like the IOR was just like, when I tell you to stay in a spot, stay in a spot.
Gene
You were
Hackman's back on the carrier calling
yeah.
it in. You're like
Owen Wilson, yeah.
Just sprinted through
Just
there.
sprinted.
Oh yeah.
Just being like, no, this is what Sandy 1 wants on his upgrade. This is what he needs.
Can Sandy 1 tell the difference between Serbs and Croats? Because I've been here for 5 years and I can't.
Oh man.
Oh god. Oh my god. Well, all right. So there's a 16 F-16 WIC instructor, notorious but also incredible. But Shotgun Macaulay. Toad, what was the story you were telling or alluding to earlier about Shotgun?
Yeah, so
if you're listening, Shotgun won't listen to this. He won't waste his time anything that's produced by me. But Shotgun, if you're listening to this, we love you, man. You are an incredible instructor. But
oh yeah, and I actually, to be fair, like I learned a lot. It was just aggressive. That's all. It's actually probably one of the best memories of my entire career. And honestly, as this story unfolds, it's going to become apparent that I probably deserved it. So, Shotgun was he's an instructor with the F-16s, and so Shotgun. I would say this: being in the halls of that school and being around Patches doing debriefs and stuff before that, there are a handful of folks that I would call they're like professional insult connoisseurs. They'll hit you with something and it'll take you 30 seconds to even figure out. Like I think he told the mission before this one, he had told one of the WUGs the mission had gone great, and the student finished their debrief and he said, which I think was fuel, and he was like, do you have anything else left to share? Anything else useful in your backpack full of ball wash that you called that debrief? And I sat there for a second and was like, I'm writing that down. That's pretty damn good. I don't know exactly what that means, but I know I can use it probably. Backpack of ball wash, yeah. And so the next week I'm the lead, and it's a giant, I don't remember which, I think it was a crossbow back in the day, and I was the lead, and I had built this brilliant search plan for how we're going to search the roads and all the intersections and all this stuff, and I made these little printouts. They were just adorable Intel products, and to put on knee boards, because like, oh man, these are gonna work out great in my mind. And I'm going to back up just a little bit. This is going to make sense in a second. Our class had a little morale event, I would say. It was like my third time that I had defended the call sign Toad, maybe 3 days prior to this. And I fell at some point. I broke 3 of my ribs, is what I'll say. So, which was like in my time as a student, there was one day where I didn't go into the vault, and it was the day after that, and it was because I was in the clinic getting my ribs x-rayed. I broke 3 of my ribs, and they were like lower ribs. Just the floor was wet, and I fell. And you should be safe when the floor is wet. And the first part of my body that made contact was my ribs. And so here I am. This has happened, and I get the opportunity to go in the back seat of the Viper for the mission that I was going to plan. And so I have told, as I'm saying this, I'm hesitating, because at the time I told nobody that I broke my ribs, because I would have done I would have crawled over broken glass to get into the back seat of that jet. And if this is going to be a red flag, I'm happy with finding that out down the road, as the flag gets thrown physically on me. And so I go through all the flight doc stuff. They don't care. Everything looks fine. And then as we get into the jet and everything is great, I've made all these products. As soon as we're taxiing out and we're on the runway, it dawns on me, they never tested the G suit. So I don't know how much it's going to inflate. And so I don't know if it's coming up here. And so I'm like, we're about to take off. If we take off and it's that flex departure, I'm going to find out about these ribs like real quick. And we don't. We just do this long, slow climb. And the first thing he says to me on the radio is he's just like, hey, did you notice anything about what I was carrying? Because we're just getting up and we're getting to the Marshall. I was like, no, I didn't. What's up? And he's just like, yeah, I didn't bring any of those ISR products that you made at all. I don't have time for that. I'm not gonna look for any of that stuff. He was just like, yeah. So, and this is like before the push. He's already telling me like he knows what the debrief items are going to be, because he knows the COAs that I said about where all the threats are going to be. He knows where they really are. And he knows I spent a lot of time making my precious little Jackson Pollock works of art of where all these things are going to be. And he didn't even bring them. And so I'm like, all right, well, this is going to be a fun ride. And so, again, I had looked at everything in the AOD, said everything should be here. But I thought, there's no way that shit's never out there. Because I just had thought, I knew that it wasn't going to be there, which I know now is an awful answer. So right at the push, we start going, and I don't remember the exact altitude or whatever, but I think we were at like maybe 20K. And
I was in the 40 block.
Yeah, and like immediately there's a very deadly SAM directly underneath us, way away from where I would have guessed it was. And we rocket all the way up to 40,000 feet. And then he levels out, and I'm watching the one, because I'm starting to realize I just need to keep my head still so that I don't F myself up, basically. As soon as we level out, he just goes at the top of his lungs, just to me, yeah, we probably effing died back there. And I'm like, oh man, that's not cool. And then he's like, and I'm like catching my breath, like, oh man, that sucks. He's just like, yeah, and I don't remember if he said what if, or if he said like if only, but he was like, what if we had someone in the NPC whose main job it would have been was telling me that was going to be there. He's like, wouldn't that have been useful? I didn't bring those products, but I could have used that information. And then we're pushing, and I'm just like, copy. Yeah, I messed that up, man. And it was a ride, like, that was the start. And then it was like 45 minutes of a SAM weave after that. And the only time, so there was it's all kind of a blur, but there was this one point where he maneuvered, and he was taking a harm shot on a SAM, and a red air passed, and then he turned really quick at the red air, and I was watching the red air. Well, I got a little comfortable, right? And like, I can see his helmet, and he's watching the red air, and then he's maneuvering, and I'm like, oh, I can do that. I can't do that. And he maneuvers, And then it's just me and the air vent and the oxygen, and I come on and I'm like, in like the biggest wuss tone that has ever come out of my mouth. I'm like, hey, I'm having a hard time back here. And he says, oh, well, hold on. He's like, are you going to puke in my fucking jet? And I was like, I don't think so. And he goes, all right, well, hold on. I don't think you're going to like this. And then he pulls in behind the one, and the one is conning, and the whole jet is just like shuddering. And then as he's doing that, he's just like pointing out aircraft for me to look at while he's continuing to maneuver. And I don't know that it was intentional or not, but then I would look, he'd maneuver, I'd get a little bit more sick. And we finally get back and we land. And that was definitely, I would just say, it was 45 minutes of a live debrief that coincided with probably the most physically exhausting thing that I had ever done. And in the fog of it all, what I remember the most, I learned a ton from him, and I swear I told damn near every WUG that I taught when I went back, hey, they don't care about that shiny, nice product you have. They really need to know about where these things are that might kill them. Don't F that up first. But also, so a bunch of Metallica came on the radio. And it was Metallica, it was Seek and Destroy, just playing on repeat. And so while he's doing this Sam weave, he's also telling me little things like, oh, they think they're doing this or that. I don't care. I like Metallica. I don't mind. I'll turn this up. And he's just like raging to Seek and Destroy while we're doing all this stuff. So it was like a bucket list item that I didn't even know that I had, combined with this learning and all this other stuff. And yeah, it was awesome. I learned a ton, but it was.
I appreciate the fact that Shotgun is just sitting there flying this airplane and just berating you as a professional.
Yeah.
Where is he now?
Yeah. Everything he said on that flight was 100% valid. Like, I definitely screwed it up, and I was in no position to quibble. Like,
yeah, it's like,
none.
He's like, Magnum, this Sam right here is just like, I knew that was going to be there. Did you?
Yeah, right. Like it was like that for damn near the whole flight. So, yeah, it was incredible. And then I landed, and I was usually like the at roll calls, like kind of the storyteller for our class. I land and I get down to Jerry's, and I'm just kind of like, I was like, hey man, let's get a beer. I'm like, I don't think I can do that right now. I don't think that's good.
The floor's a little wet.
I don't think I can do that right now. And they're like, Toad, what the hell happened to you up there?
Oh my god. Zero. What's the Nighthawk? You got a Nighthawk? Did you have your head on straight for that one?
Oh, dude, my time as a student, I think that I was there.
Did awesome. We did awesome.
I think about that in retrospect. At the time, I didn't think I did awesome. I don't know if you know this, but I was heading out to Aviano. I had never been on a base with a flight line before. All right, so I had never been around prior to becoming a student. I remember I got picked up to go to the course. I think I cracked a bunch of jokes inside my look, and that's what got me into the program. And then a great American, Zap Bertieri, was my tier 1 who was going to spin me up. And day one, he's like, all right, so if you go into the 3-1, just look through the threat guide there. You'll be able to find out. And I had been an officer already at that point. I've been in 7 years. I was a really older person coming into the program. And I remember asking Zap, I was like, hey, real quick, before I do this, when you say 3-1, like, what is that? And I remember nothing. And he was just like, holy shit. And he was like, this is the worst that could ever happen. So I did find, though, when we went through the course, it was a huge catch-up moment for me. And I had so many, like, you guys took me under your wing and, like, helped me understand what that world was all about. The rest of my classmates helped me out. And then 2 days of the course, we go back to visit NSA, and I'm like, I'm finally in my element. I know this place, man. Like this is the one thing I can actually talk about. And it turns out those are the only like non-graded events of the entire time in the course. So it was completely useless for me to even have that experience. So yeah, that was my time. I think the other thing that probably hit me most of all was like, that was really when my T started getting really low. You know what I mean? I had a lot of low T during the course. I gained 30 pounds, I think. But here's the thing. It wasn't like I gained 30 pounds. Like that's a lot of weight to gain in 6 months. No. I like lost 15 to start and then gained 30 on top of the start point. So it probably was like a delta. It was like a reverse basic training for me. Somewhere around halfway through the course, someone introduced me to Hawaiian barbecue. And I was like, well, this is broccoli. Like there's broccoli in here, but it's like mac salad and rice and everything else. I was like, surely I didn't have time to get meals or cook. So I would buy, a staple of like 4 of those. I'd buy like 3 of those to have per day. Each of those is like 2,000 calories per one, and I just ate that. I thought I was just making it happen. But yeah, that was my experience there, and I've since, I don't know if I've ever lost the weight since the end of the schoolhouse. It destroyed me health-wise.
Well, then last time we talked about you grabbing the 0550. So come on, dude. Like, but also the A1 mobile catering van. Like that was the one.
Yeah.
Like the carne asada fries.
Yeah.
That were always just.
Dude.
You just be sitting there. It always happened. I think they knew when I was like just landed before my debrief. Like all of a sudden you hear like driving around the back of the weapon school. I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna want those carne asada fries. I absolutely want those.
We so rest in peace, Boston Market on Nellis. But
yeah, for sure. For sure.
I had a streak. I if I remember, it was at least 30. I might have got to 35. But it was 30 to 35-ish days in a row where I had a Boston Market chicken pot pie, and that was all that I had. And that was enough. So with all the carbs I was having, that was,
for
sure. Highly processed, distilled carbs. One thing that I think is funny about the school, and about, I would just call, if we're going to talk about funny stories and shenanigans, I didn't really say this one before, so anybody can cut me off at any point. But I would just talk about general thievery and behavior. Primarily, I would say TDY thievery, but it happens everywhere. At some point, so there are giant TDYs that we have on the Intel side where we'll go to like DC.
Yeah, you guys.
Go. Yeah, well. We'd like to bring. Well, I would just say at one point that list got significantly shorter as a result of general thievery and disrespect because of the thievery. There was a very important place to visit in DC that we didn't go to anymore after 2021 because people had sticky fingers and couldn't keep it under control. That place was the White House, but
I'm just gonna ask a question. I was like, you stole from the White House, didn't you?
Yeah, it was actually, and I don't know exactly what it was, but it was in and around the Situation Room, not in it. It was not in it. I don't want to say that, but
around the Situation Room,
somewhere around there. No, I wasn't a part of any of that, but I'd heard. But there was also, I think, in the building. Yeah, people are saying it. I would say from all the classes, whenever I was there was a class sometime in 2022 that was probably the most prolific thieves to the point that they caused multiple SCL and commander meetings with the commandant to have things returned. To the White House. And there were JTACs threatening violence on Intel WUGs. It was an ugly time, but we worked through it, and things were returned mostly. What's funny is, there was something that was very coveted that was stolen that was the result of a strike. Just imagine that if somebody had like hit a peg-legged terrorist and they had like recovered the wooden leg or whatever. Well, and the leg is missing, and there ends up being a loud altercation between JTAX and some Intel folks about you better give it back or I'm gonna do something awful to you. And then they're like, well, all right, let's negotiate. And they're like, okay, give us the leg back and we'll give you your thing back. And then they're like, all right, well, we'll give you, yeah, the leg. That's what you're tracking. And they're like, what else did you take? And then they go back and look, and there was like there was way more stuff that was missing. But
I will give you this one thing back, and then we will never speak of this again.
Yeah,
That's all we took.
That's it. Yeah, and then we'll be good. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm just picturing like 5 19th WUGs and IORs like working together and like actually lifting the Resolute desk like out of the White House and just taking it and like walking it down the hallway. Because pens, right? Pens and M&Ms. That's what you guys stole from the White House.
It was pens. Yeah, that's it.
That's it.
but it isn't. People apologized. It's all worked out. There's no problem or anything like that.
No.
But the key thing though is that there's an art to this stuff. If you're gonna take something, you've got to at least give them the opportunity. You've got to give them some sort of ransom or something like that. You can't just be a thieving terrorist. You're just taking things and not. You've got to have the ransom. If they don't have the ability to give it back, then people start stealing signs off of walls and in the main hallway.
It's incredibly good for morale. It's incredibly good for morale. You need to have that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, and I'll be honest. My desk is like 50% stuff from TDYs, to include some like tungsten, like pieces of. I had gone on some live fire things, and like we had like pieces of frag and stuff, and so like I just have some like creative paperweights. I would just say so. Yeah. But the thievery is always funny because eventually the Bobs have to get together to work it out, and and they all think it's funny. They just don't think it's funny that they're having to talk about it.
That's right. Except, the thievery, like sometimes, I was gonna say like thievery is frowned upon until it actually happens to a WUG or an IP, such as maybe a helmet going missing. But but then when it happens to them, then all of a sudden that's all they want. That's all they want to talk about.
Yeah.
They don't have a sense of humor, man. That's just messed up. Oftentimes, there's taking a look at like the historical precedent for some of this stuff. Like in World War II, you'd have the Kilroy was here. If you guys are familiar with that, like people would leave the Kilroy was here graffiti. In World War II, that's where the comic came from. Toad and I have a friend of ours who developed a Zap, which essentially is like a sticker, if you will, right? And this guy looks like a bald, brown Gomez from the Addams Family. And he has this sticker of just his face that exists on probably every highly classified and or base in the entire inventory of the Air Force and beyond. And we find it to this day, wherever this guy has been, and he has permeated these Zaps, these stickers, and they're absolutely everywhere. We saw one the other day in the middle of the NRO, just stuck to the fridge, and I have no idea how it got there. So we don't just take; sometimes we give too.
I showed up about a week ago, and I had walked into a squadron's bar area. And as soon as I walk in, I see their fridge, and on it, and I know it was recent because it's towards the bottom, I see the Zap, and I'm like meeting people, and they're like, yeah, it's nice to meet you. And I see it, and I'm immediately like, I need to know who put that Zap there. Because this is not a common location. I just don't know how it ended up here whatsoever. And everybody's like, yeah, I don't know. And I was like, you would know. And I looked at, there's a couple of people that are here that I know from the school. And I'm like, that's a zap from that guy. And they're like, you think I knew him? I was like, I know you knew him. Because he was there at the same time as me. And they're like, what did he look like? And I'm like, it looks exactly like that. That zap right there. Yeah, it looks just like that. And they're like, I don't know who put that there. So I've got a little ongoing investigation to try to figure that out. But they are literally everywhere. I've seen pictures of I think we lost Zero. I've seen pictures of signs in England that have like a stick figure guy, and it's like a crosswalk sign, and the head has this sticker on it, and it's like, who in rural England is just doing this stuff? So, yeah, they're everywhere.
You were in England, and because I know you went to McConnell, good old McConnell last
Yeah.
not too long ago.
And he's back.
Zero's back.
Oh, I don't think we got your mic.
Uh-oh. We'll get him back.
Yeah.
We'll get him back. But yeah, because you went to McConnell last couple weeks. Where were you at?
Yeah, we went to McConnell for a little bit. No.
There he is. You back?
All right, I'm back. All right,
back.
Yes, you're back.
We are so back.
We are so back.
Yeah, we were in McConnell, and actually, a little bit of a shout out to Nebraska, because I tried to warn my wife before we left Rapid City. Hey, I know everybody says Nebraska's flat, but where we're going in Nebraska, it is not going to be flat. And she's driving my truck and pulling a U-Haul, and we went through the sand hills after the Badlands, and that was an eventful drive. That was a very eventful drive. Yeah.
Driving through the great state of Nebraska.
Yeah, well, if you don't have cell service, and if you by chance have somebody that did not turn on the trailer hitch function on your vehicle, and then you're going over those hills, your check engine light will come on pretty quick.
Yeah.
And it's an emotional situation, but
Oh, well, I just saw her out of the corner of my eye, but Beth, my wife, she still has not forgiven me, but she drove from Georgia. No, oh gosh, I'm trying to Phoenix to South Carolina. So she's like driving from Phoenix to South Carolina for us to go. I can't remember where.
With the kids or by herself?
No, she's driving from. Yeah, Phoenix to Georgia. No, this is like right. We got married like 3 weeks before.
Nice.
And we're going, and then we're gonna drive back. All in all, I knew she was driving. I know she's driving from Phoenix. She's going east, and we're going. And I did not hook up the U-Haul correctly, and it came undone while she was driving. And I think this might be the very first time that I've admitted that I don't hook the U-Haul correctly. I did it correctly. Like something else happened. But I think this might be the very first time, 11 years, 12 years later, that I might not have hooked it up correctly. But
That was it a catastrophic accident after the fact?
Like ripped. Like yeah, it was bad. It was
Oh,
bad.
no.
She had to have where it happened was bad. She had to have somebody pull over and help her. It was just a disaster. It was a disaster.
the way we address it, right, from the Intel side, is that you would just say simply you're gonna talk in percentages, and so it's a non-0% chance that the U-Haul was connected incorrectly.
100%. 100%.
Yeah.
100%.
You just should have said it was gray zone, man. Something happened.
Oh.
It was a gray zone
It could have
thing.
been. It could have been.
You know what? I didn't want to go in direct conflict with you by telling you that I did not have
This was below the threshold of
Well,
nuclear war.
Here's the thing. It looked like you were going to nail the drive, and so we had to manufacture a DFP.
100%. Just like we were talking
Yeah.
about. It's just like,
Yeah.
hey, this ride went too well. Like this whole TX went too well. Married now. I need to give you a little bit of adversity because you're never going to have any just married to me in the first place. But yeah, no, that's that. But U-Hauls through Nebraska, U-Hauls through Phoenix.
Oh my gosh.
That's gonna be a problem. Well, speaking of gray zone, so like we were talking about that.
Uh-oh.
First off, I don't know. I'm an ACSC. I'm doing it. It's a beautiful thing. I just had to write an essay on gray zone warfare.
Stop it.
And
All right, what'd you write about?
dude, so I could pull it up, but basically all I was just talking about was the fact that gray zone warfare is what exists, because another shout out to Kelso is maybe write this down, maybe knock on wood, but never in the history of ever has it happened, and I am a firm believer in, as is Kelso, but is no two nuclear equipped states will ever engage in direct conventional warfare with each other ever again. It's never happened since 1945. It's like when we dropped the first two atomic weapons, it's just like, now it's just always gray zone and proxies. Like the Cold War, cool, is like, but why would two nuclear equipped powers ever go with conventional warfare and fight a war of attrition when it's just like, all right, you know what? We're going to stop beating on each other and we're just going to drop nukes. It's like, so that's like why gray zone warfare exists. And so I just like wrote that into my essay, and then on the message boards of just like, gray zone warfare only exists because of the nuclear deterrence and nuclear weapons, and no two nuclear equipped states will ever engage in conventional warfare ever again, ever. And that did not sit well. That did not sit well with a lot of.
Well, hey, you know,
basically, I'm saying like war with China will never happen. Like that's
when
what
you
I'm
know,
saying. Like,
you know what's interesting about that?
Yeah.
You can. What's interesting about that, right? So you can look at the lack of evidence showing two nuclear states fighting each other, right, as a way to prove that. But you could also look at the immense amount of evidence of the only countries that nuclear states tend to mess with, and it usually ends up being states. I would just use an example, right? So if you look at, I don't want to get too far on a side quest here, but if you look at, if you were a country right now trying to guarantee your sovereignty, they understand something, and it's that if they go all out and they achieve that nuclear threshold, they kind of get a get out of jail free card because it's never been demonstrated before. And so you look at North Korea, on one end, you could see a pursuit for ultimate sovereignty in the pursuit of nuclear weapons, but from our perspective, it's the pursuit of being able to hold leverage over us. But there's a threshold where those lines cross, and they're probably safe if they successfully have it, right? And so,
Yeah.
but you look, if you're a nuclear state and you're like, hey, Gaddafi got rid of his stuff and look what happened to him. Saddam never fully developed nukes and look what happened to him. Iran doesn't have them yet and look what they're dealing with. But you look at the people that made it to the nuclear club, they don't have to deal with all these things.
Yeah. And that's like the thing. Oh, go ahead, Zero. It's I can see it cooking.
It's cooking.
You love gray zone conflict and the fact
Well, no,
that it's
so
a concept and that we always care about it.
I love it. I love to hate it. And so let me, as a term. So let's, here's my thing. If you take even the term gray zone, if you go through, and I have not done IDE. I did do it in correspondence, but I didn't get a chance to like go and doing that stuff yet. But I will say, if you read through the paper specifically since 2015 on, like post Crimea on, where that was more of a hybrid warfare thing, which does have some distinction from gray zone, you see that every single one of those papers has a non-uniform definition where they will distinctly identify gray zone. Typically, it can be divided by intensity. It can be divided by location. It can be divided by the function. It can be divided by the participant. It can be divided by, the proximal, timeline with which it takes to execute. So you can have all these different ways to slice it. And I've seen every single paper with that very it becomes imprecise of like what exactly is this thing relative? Is it proxy wars? Is it as the example of the who's doing it? Is it NGOs as opposed to nations and corporations? Is it Banana Republic kind of stuff that's actually pulling this thing off? Is it, and then from terms of functionally, is it economic statecraft, or is it cyber warfare? Does that count, right? Or does the CrowdStrike issues, do those count? So I think the question I have is like, is the definition of gray zone, is it imprecise because we have devolved into nonsensical business jargon in all the ways we talk about things in the military?
Yes.
Or is it imprecise by design?
It's real easy to throw money at a problem that you can't narrowly define.
That's the point. Well, and
that's like
so
the most simplistic one of it is just like it is the.
I'm in, baby. I'm all locked in. I'm in the fucking. I'm on the thinking man.
It's like the zone. It's the zone that exists between peacetime and wartime.
Sure.
And I'm like,
that's everything.
And with nations that are in competition with each other, and I'm like, okay, so Tuesday, like, got it. Like, it's like,
we're in a
and
gray zone
these are the
war.
things that we're gonna do. And from basically everything that I had to read about this thing that's completely made up and nonsensical, with no real uniform definition, is not only can we not define it, but everyone else is better at it than we are.
Well, and Flash, yes. So we have. This is the only way I'll do a small little pushback to you on the like, will two nuclear powers ever go to fight one another? And I think the answer is mostly no. The answer is mostly no, until we discover how bad we are at doing everything else. And so, what I mean by that is, in the Cold War, there were many examples where you could make the claim that there was obviously a gray zone style conflict. And Toad and I were talking about Gladio prior to this, which were the stay behind paramilitary forces we had placed in Europe and allied nations in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. Of like, at the time, it made sense for the fast rollout of the Soviets, if they were to like push forward past the Fulda Gap. We know, we had 72 hours to 96 hours that we weren't going to hold them back if they really wanted to do it or whatever that meant. So you needed leave behind forces of people who hated Bolsheviks to like hang out in some of these states to like take care of business. It just so happened, and this is where the controversy comes in, like the people who predominantly hated the Soviet Union more than anybody else were like old Nazis. And so that's who we used to do that. So that kind of created, that's where people get a little upset about. Anyway.
That's right.
But if you think about it from like that gray zone standpoint, the distinction between what was going on in the Cold War to what's going on today is, in the Cold War, while it was still a global conflict, you had a uniformity of purpose against a common adversary that was exporting ideology. Whereas today, we can say we're in competition with Iran, China, axis of evil, all those stuff, right? North Korea, Russia, blah, blah, blah. It's still global, but it's not focused. And not only is it not focused, but the actual main competitor in that world, there's not, while they have an ideological difference and somehow they're able to dodge the bullet on the fact that there were, bloody Bolsheviks murdering some of their own people for decades on end, right? Or I shouldn't say use Bolsheviks, Marxists, right? Commies. It doesn't matter because they're not really exporting ideology the same way that the Soviet Union was exporting ideology, or at least if they are exporting ideology, they're doing so in such an insidious manner that we're just doing it worse than they are. So I view the gray zone thing as such an interesting discussion because it is such I view it the same way I view information warfare. Like when I hear the words information warfare, I get like throw up a little bit in my mouth because of the imprecision of both the definition and the fact that oftentimes when people use it, it is such a dangerous thing to talk about and not wield it with precision, right? If you want to use that, you have to be good at it in order to make sure things don't devolve and you make the antidote to information warfare worse than the disease. And that's part of,
Yeah.
that's one of the biggest issues I think we have right now.
Which I mean, because that's the thing. Like, which by the way, I've been reading up on a lot of layman geopolitics lately, and figuring out some of these things. But like, the thing that I've now come to realize about, once again, information warfare, trying to make Zero throw up as many times as possible in the next 5 minutes. But information warfare and gray zone warfare, or hybrid tactics, if you will, is all these other people that we're in great power competition with. Like, we have a lot of people, like, roughly, and then subsequently their proxies. Angola, like, whatever. Angola, 60,000 solar panels. And
Yeah.
the thing that we look at there is, like, they, the proverbial they, are only executing gray zone warfare against one entity, us, like the United States. And it's like, so it's them against us, and then it's us against them. But the thing is, for us to like live and compete in this, the things we have to do in that sphere is we have to just be completely unfocused in perpetuity, because like, unless we actually go to conflict, unless we like cooperate with these actors, and it's just a weird thing, because it creates, the one thing that I was reading was like, it creates a distracted America, is what it creates.
And I think that so we haven't paid attention to parts of the globe for several decades that we used to pay attention to in the Cold War. So we used to put a lot of emphasis in the ideological export of communism, essentially, to South America and to Africa. And while you can make the claim that we have put emphasis in Africa a little bit, it's still always going to be third fiddle for the last, like, think of what after the fall of the Soviet Union, it was Eastern Europe, and then after Eastern Europe, it's Iraq and Eastern Europe, then it's the Middle East for 20 plus years, and then a Pacific pivot. And none of those places are we looking at Southcom or now AFRICOM with any real look, besides a few little spatterings in Djibouti, Black Hawk Down scenarios, which we pulled out from, right? There's so much, that terrain, that part of the map, that surface attack area, if you will, of geopolitics, that takes up such a massive portion of the globe, where all of our resource extraction is. We've been so hyper focused on, and as we have been post World War II, it's like, it's the European theater and it's the Middle East. And so, where some of these gray zone locations where these proxy fights would happen, we haven't had them be the priority. Right now, it's Ukraine and it's the Middle East and it's the China fight, but we aren't sending our best oftentimes to parts of the world where we could actually get layup wins in the gray zone fight. My opinion.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree. It's just one of those where it's become such now. It's just like, well, yeah, we're just executing in the gray zone. It's in the gray zone, and now it's just one of these things where it's like, actually, it's kind of not in the gray zone, because just like we talked about, everyone's talking about it, leaf targeting. But that's what they're doing. People are talking about it. It's like, that's what they're doing to us, and it's kind of one of those where you're just like, well, yeah, but that's like left of conflict, and you're just like, well, I don't know, but it's just a weird thing.
If the DoD and other, like, kind of the actioning arms, your Title 10 authorities people talk like this, sometimes that bleeds into, and maybe we talk like that because there is an absence of work being done at the State Department in that world, in the economic statecraft game, or how we export some of those things. Maybe there's an absence there, or maybe their priorities, without getting too much into it, like, we've outsourced it so much into this non-government organization world that we have sat there and we've abandoned some of the necessary functions of government to go out there and perform diplomatic relationships with some of these countries, and we allow the NGO to do it, which the NGO, at the end of the day, like, that does give obfuscation for the United States, but it's not necessarily the way you want to have happen.
Yeah, I agree. And that's like I don't know. It's just, now that it's become I also think that in times of relative peace, I think we kind of have, we're looking for things to do and also define kind of like where we are in the geopolitical world. And because we can't define it, we had to come up with something that is a term for it, and that's what we've elected it, and we brought it back. Like everything that you read is just like gray zone conflict isn't new, and you're like, you're right, it's not new. It's just the space, the thing that exists between wartime. Like in the event that countries aren't in direct conflict with each other, like Russia and Ukraine, they're not in the gray zone. They're fighting. Like that's their thing. But like now we're living in the gray zone between us and everybody else, and it's just the thing that exists in in an irrational world, and don't try to get cute to define it. In my opinion. But
Yeah. The interesting thing about
what do you think, geopolitics expert?
yeah, I'm but a layman here, but like I think the interesting thing about what Zero was saying, which by the way, apologies for the chair. I can see that. So I'm on top of it. I've been fighting a battle with this thing since we moved into this house. So
we should burn it on the live chat.
Yeah. I needed that weight though for that move, or we would have left it in South Dakota. So what's interesting, so Zero brought up the ideological aspect of this, and I think that what is very interesting to me about it now is that if you look back at the Cold War, you had the Soviet Union. They were conducting. So one of the things that I was reading about a lot earlier today, because I was reading about competing ideologies about how to conduct things in these gray areas, and so there's a theory out there called the dirty hands theory, which is that it's okay if people who advocate this, they think that if you fudge you can do some immoral things if the end result basically end justifies the means. And so that is what you could use to justify a lot of the Latin American coups that took place during the Cold War. In that case, we were setting aside our ideology in terms of who we were willing to deal with, but we were also setting aside our own ethics in order to compete in these areas. Now, on the flip side of that, you have the Soviet Union totally handcuffed by their ideology during the Cold War, because they may not have overtly been supporting commies everywhere in South America. They were in a lot of places, but everywhere that they were supporting them, they were supporting them with the intent that those folks would eventually take over the keys to the kingdom, and then they would have an ideological client state in our backyard. If you look at how things are conducted now, so we're in a competition that's very different, and we haven't really picked up on it yet. And in a lot of ways, we are more tied to ideologies when it comes to who we deal with in the world than our competitors are. And what I mean by that is, like, when you see China doing things in South America or in Africa, they don't care if they set up a client state. They care if they get the goods and the resources that they want out of those countries. They don't care. And so they're functioning off of realism, essentially, just to get what they want. Meanwhile, we are running around the world with all sorts of he's dead, we got to move on. We're running around the world right now with all sorts of ideological strings attached to every conversation that we have with anyone around the world, which actually handcuffs us more, because we say, if you're going to deal with us, then you've got to do this laundry list of ideological things that agrees with us. And China's just showing up saying, we're going to give you billions of dollars for infrastructure projects, just make sure that we get the cobalt that we need.
Yeah. And like the one thing that Zero sent us earlier about like the Atlantic Council, where it's just like, hey, but you're the guys that are supposed to handle this. But like they were talking about just like, yeah, you have to get over you will win in the gray zone if you have effectively no morals and no public that's going to call you out. Like authoritarian and autocratic societies win wholesale in the gray zone because they can come in and just be like, we're going to do this with this country because it's going to help us out against that country, Whereas like, and they don't care about like anything about human rights violations or anything of that nature. Whereas if we partner with a nation, if we ally ourselves with a nation, then now you have a public that, one, is going to hear about it because of free press, and then two, is going to have a problem with it or have some I'm drawing a blank on the word, but kind of public sentiment on how they feel about allying with said country. And so allying with some of these South American countries or African countries, that yes, that would give us a foothold in some very strategic places in the world, but it's not gonna sit well with the American people, and we have to worry about that, and China just doesn't. Because if somebody's like, hey, I don't like that we partnered with that country, did you hear about the fact that they still have slavery? And
right.
They're like, China, like the CPC would just be like, nope.
Right.
I did not hear that.
Yeah, they're like, in fact, I don't. Yeah, they're like, I don't even hear you saying it right now. Like,
exactly.
So.
Exactly. I don't even know. You're not even a real person. You're not even talking. You're not even talking about it right now. So.
Yeah, but that's exactly where you see these countries falling across the Sahel right now. That's exactly why some of that stuff is happening. These new people show up and they're going to accept help and money from whoever's willing to offer it, and they're not going to promise to meet goals related to solar power or wind energy or anything like that at the expense of their own objectives. So, but that's the kind of the irony of it, is that we didn't used to compete in these gray areas in that way, but now we do, but it's somewhat to a detriment. But it all depends on the lens that you're looking through. If you think that the norms are the premier thing to uphold and not the gains of access in certain countries, then you think that you're winning, when actuality you're slowly losing access.
Exactly, and like that's kind of especially when countries have kind of looked how we have become a superpower by projection of power and then just force on force. Like, hey, if you come meet us on the battlefield like Revolutionary War style and go try to match us like gun for gun and don't fight asymmetrically, then we win every single time. Or the fact if we're going to get into a place where we are going to use our nuclear deterrent is going to turn from a deterrent to an actual use. Like, that's not what countries are going to do anymore. They know that that's not how they're going to fight us. They're going to fight us kind of the way Abraham Lincoln said that we would fall, is like from within. Is now they can get there. We can get into a state of like that information is Russian bots or whatever you want to use and stuff like that. Is just like, get the United States to start arguing with themselves, separate them from alliances, and then now force them to become distracted, and then now you might have a chance to beat them on the battlefield. Is kind of what it is, and that's kind of what happened like when towards the end of the Afghanistan conflict, like Afghanistan war, global war on terror, is our allies started just being like, hey, it's been 20 years. We don't really want to do this anymore. Like, I think we're done playing this game. And we started to lose a little bit of our coalition, and having to ramp up our presence to achieve the same effects became kind of a problem for us towards the end, as we're aware, since we're now 2 years from the withdrawal a couple weeks ago. But what else is going on in the world?
Well, so I'm always looking around on the periphery. I'm going to start writing again because of this move. I slowed down. I don't think I've posted anything for about a month, but it's back on now, I guess. So yeah, I think he's alive. He's alive, and he's in the chat. So there's a couple of areas. I think it's a little bit late now, but it isn't over with yet. But the whole Venezuela-Guyana thing is very interesting.
Yeah.
But then there's also all of these nations across the Sahel, like Niger and then Chad. And I've noticed that we're trying to reestablish a lot of our connections and bases, primarily with Chad. But with Niger, what's interesting about that is you can kind of see some fingerprints of competition amongst great powers in that. I don't want to like say that these links are too definite because they're kind of hard to define, but I would just say I don't. So just to throw some numbers out there, so France has like 65% of all of the nuclear power capacity in the entire European Union, like about 65%. So they are by far producing the majority of the electricity for the European Union, and they're doing it through nuclear. France gets about 50% of its, or well, I would say they used to get 50% of their uranium from Niger. I don't think that it's a coincidence that within about a month of Macron of France saying that France was about to become more aggressive in their support for Ukraine and potentially putting armed forces of France in Ukraine, I don't think that it's a coincidence that in a month or two time after that, that is when all this stuff happened in Niger, and all of a sudden France has lost access to 50% of its uranium in Niger. And so that's an example of something on the margin, in particular in Niger, that ultimately probably sprung from competing powers in an indirect conflict, and then Russia basically says we're going to go ahead and take, or we're going to flip this area and potentially make you lose access to a lot of these resources. They get the other 50% roughly from a place called Namibia, which is down around Angola, and so far there's nothing going on there. But if you can effectively isolate 50% of somebody's resources for their electricity, like that's the kind of game that the Russians like to play whenever it comes to resource extraction. They've already got a massive amount of influence over the majority of the uranium that's produced in the world because it comes out of Kazakhstan. And all of the Western world, because of our sanctions, has already been cut off from that Kazakh uranium. And so now you can start to see a lot of these little actions around the periphery where they're starting to isolate those supply chains even further. So that's just one example. And the French are not really making any headway right now in getting that uranium back. So that's just one example.
Oh yeah, it's like, and that's kind of the thing. Like we can sanction as many people as we want, but like really what Zero, I love it. He's like he's here. Everyone, Zero's a ghost right now. I'm trying. Let's see what we can do. I don't know. But Zero is here, guys. He's here. But
yeah, he's lurking. He has got some serious goodness about a lot of the Guyana stuff. But I can tell you too. So there's a lot of conversations going on about Venezuela and Guyana because Venezuela just recently had the election, and what would have potentially been a prime opportunity to embolden some people to potentially get rid of Maduro, which was maybe missed, some would say. Hey. So.
You guys hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, sick.
As you're driving.
Hell yeah.
So in Guyana, you basically have, so the projections right now are that by 2027, for annual oil production, Guyana will be able to produce as much as the United Arab Emirates can. And so it's not a coincidence that the area that the Venezuelans all of a sudden they're interested in taking away again happens to be where all of that's where the economic exclusion, or the exclusive economic zone is where all that is located. So, yeah, not great.
So one thing, I got a chance to hear you guys talk. It was awesome. The one thing I want to say though is, who are we bringing to the table to do some of these negotiations when it's Wagner that shows up to Niger, or if it's different Spetsnaz or Chinese entities in Guyana that are sitting there working with the VZ. Now I understand. I think it's just for us, we've gone so whole hog into these international organizations, the NGO groupings, to be able to do what is our statecraft dirty work. And to be perfectly frank, I don't know if we have the capacity to compete to scale with the rest of the world when that happens. And that's just what I've observed. And when I think that and I also think that if I'm a country like Angola or like Guyana or everywhere else, I want to be able to talk to the head MFer in charge, right? I don't want to have to talk to some de facto cutout international org that I have to kowtow around for a bunch of other different ideological boxes I need to check in order to get whatever realist goals my country may have for my own self-interest. And so I think I think by our own design and structure, we outsourced things to try and compete with an adversary that we thought could do things a little bit more craftily because they have whole of government approaches a little bit quicker. But in so doing that outsourcing, we've only created more bureaucratic latency to make us less effective at doing it. Over.
Yeah. Nice. And that's kind of I put what Sandra was saying like up on the thing. It's just like everybody else, like if they could fight it and win against us head on, they would. It's okay that you and I disagree, Sandra, because I said that they like nuclear equipped powers won't fight each other. But that's exactly right. It's just like they're going to do these other things like Zero and Toad are talking about that are going to achieve their objectives in the long run because they do play longer games than the United States generally. But it's going to achieve their objectives in the long run, and they feel that it is more return on investment, something that we talked about in the last one, like a larger return on investment to invest in these ways than it is to potentially do something harmful to the United States, like directly. And that's kind of the things is what they're looking at. But it's, yeah. I apologize if it's hard to hear me. My microphone must not be working too well. Today.
I got you loud and clear.
Yeah. I don't know. Guys, I appreciate it. We're coming towards the end of our time. Obviously, Zero's in the car jumping out. But this is our first kind of live stream. Put it up on YouTube, put it up on X, put it up on Facebook. Just kind of seeing how this goes. We're also going to record this as just a Flash Zero Toad bro chat. But thank you pretty much. Thank you for 1 second. There you go. You're popping out. You're back.
Okay.
Kind of thanks for sticking with us and putting some of the comments in the chat that we talk about. You guys, some people asking for us to talk about politics. We are still in the military, the three of us. So kind of one of those where, there you go, pop that lipper in there. But the three of us, like, we try to stay away from politics as much as we can. We'll talk about geopolitics, but we generally will try to stay away from this. And as far as being a weekly thing, we could do something. It'll be more often than we'll do, and we can kind of have some of these bro chats because people like just us sitting around and kind of riffing on stuff. We'll do this a little bit more often, and I appreciate pretty much all this. But Zero, are you heading out to your AOC's retirement like right now? Is that happening?
Oh no, it's not happening right now. I had to pop in the car because I hadn't eaten all day, so I was gonna go get some food because I'm in the hotel room. So I realized I lost the chat once I got into the elevator, and then by that point it was all she wrote for me. I was screwed.
All right. I just want to run through that comment real fast. Yeah, I took myself out of this Wi-Fi and I got into an elevator while I was having like a live chat.
So Flash, I'll be honest. Dude, I didn't even have Wi-Fi in the room because I'm staying at a buddy's Airbnb and haven't been able to even get the right setup there yet. So I was flying dangerously the whole time, sir.
Oh my God, you're living in Angola, dude. It's like
I am. I think one thing I think that would be neat is like doing some current events here at some point in the future. Would love, sure. Yeah, and sometimes from the politics side, it just kind of becomes, when you start talking realism and some of these other issues, it just becomes, you can have a theory that you subscribe to, that you can talk about, that some of it just makes a little bit more sense than others in today's current climate.
Well,
For sure. And
the other thing that I would add to that too is with what we do, a lot of what we do, it is vital to if you can't understand how your adversaries think and how your adversaries approach certain things around the world, then your ability to come up with courses of action for how they're going to behave, they're almost never going to be accurate. And so what we end up doing a lot of times is we will have to research that and get familiar with their ideology so that we can nail the courses of action. But whenever it comes to politics, there is a tendency a lot of times for folks to confuse understanding or explaining things with advocating for those things. And so sometimes it can be an extra touchy endeavor. For example, like, if we were to we could have an entire show just about Russians' perceptions about Ukraine and how the Russians believe that Ukrainians are actually just Russians under a different name. If someone were to say that in the current climate, I would just say a lot of times that ends up being appearing to be very volatile, and people are very sensitive to those things, when in actuality all you're really doing is offering an explanation or trying to offer up understanding. And so the politics thing can be difficult right away, but especially I think today with how sensitive folks are, sometimes advocacy gets confused with understanding, making it even more of a minefield.
And the term for that.
Oh, go ahead.
The term for that that I think people have forgotten often has been strategic empathy. So if you can't show some strategic empathy to understand, hey, this is the Russian position right now, this is the Chinese position right now, then you're not going to make a great course of action. And I think that's where we often sometimes fall short, because you'll hear analysts talk about, well, how comes these people don't respect the new neoliberal world order that we wanted to get? Those their words, not mine. And it's because they don't see the world that way. They see the world still via, the resurgence of the nation state. And I think that is, that is one way that I think you can look at the world and prescribe to it. And it's a good way to understand your adversary. And it's good to respect them in that sense and take emotion out of it. Otherwise, you're going to have really bad analysis. And it's something to be said that, we used to have rules when we would conduct analysis on certain countries. We wouldn't take, your foreign interloper expats to make those claims and assessments. But now we do. But you have to understand those people are most likely our best, or I should say the talking heads that talk a lot about Russian-Ukraine relations are people who've been excommunicated and kicked out of Russia. So they're going to have some sort of established bias when they talk about these things. That's a little bit different than others.
Yeah, and that's it's kind of I was just kind of chuckling about the people on the side. It's like, you can't hear me. It's just like, here's my microphone that I use. But it's just going back to concepts of warfare, like, no kidding, Sun Tzu. It's like, know thy enemy. And so when you're looking at some of these things, being able to explain their position just makes you either cements that what you're doing is the correct thing, the correct COA in relation to them, or it's going to start to highlight some of the things you're just like, oh, I didn't really, once I saw it from their perspective, I now can kind of forecast in advance forecast in advance. That's what forecast means. I can forecast what their reaction to what we're doing to them is going to be, because I now understand their perspective. And then now it's going to help you as far as like achieve your effects with potentially no counteraction coming back onto you. And so somebody being able to sit here, like Toad said, it would not be difficult for the three of us, because of just what we like to do, is we could sit here and argue for the Russians in their invasion against Ukraine. We don't necessarily agree, like, at all we don't have a stance that the Russians should ever invade Ukraine. That's not a thing. Like nations should not invade sovereign countries. That should be a moral thing that all nations should abide by. Like, we have borders, and you should not invade. That's a thing. But we could advocate for that just to understand. But just like Toad said, it's just like you can't get into that because people are going to sit here and just be like, oh my God, these 3 U.S. military members advocate for Russia and are on the side of Russia, and like that's not the case. But you can still at least have a conversation about it, even if you disagree with it, which I definitely do, by the way.
Yeah, and that's just I know Ben had said something about talking about sports and politics. I could drop a sports analogy on you. If you're, I mean, I am a I have half of my family is from central Louisiana, and so I was gifted with LSU fandom for most of my time on this planet, and I understand and I understood Nick Saban. That did not make me dislike and hate Alabama any less. But if you're going to come up with a game plan, you've got to for you to come up with an honest game plan, you've got to honestly sit there and figure out what your adversary's playbook is going to look like so that you can come up with whatever it is that you want to do. And so, yeah, I would just offer that up there. And the big difference, again, like the big difference is advocacy versus understanding. Yeah, I can't reiterate that enough.
Yeah.
Holding a thought without agreeing with it.
Exactly. Exactly. It's like, I can see where you're coming from. I disagree with you, and we might not get along for it, but I can at least have the thought that I'm going to at least hear your perspective and kind of go from there. And like,
and that analytical. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Flash. Sorry.
No, you're good. No, you're good.
Yeah, that I think too that you can have analytical hubris that cuts breadth-wise, and you can have it cut temporally too, which is the question to say that you want to make sure that you don't have analytical hubris across breadth, so you can understand the position of your adversary, which that means is like strategic empathy of what's going on in modernity, like what's happening now. But you can also then, I've noticed this a lot. I think bad analysis can also dovetail off the people who disrespect old ideas from the past, right? If they think that, oh, well, I'm I live in 2024. I'm currently the smartest person that ever lived because I have a computer and I have digitization of my data and everything else like that. And all these idiots from the 1800s who had their ideas, they're just dumb. That's a really bad way to like find yourself in a world of hurt, recreating old problems too. And I think that there's something to be said about having both strategic empathy in contemporary geopolitics and then strategic empathy for histrionics of people that have come before you and come with different theories and ideas. How can those apply to the modern day? The context is different, but most of the time the rules of the game remain the same with human beings.
Yeah. It's like, and people people talking about the fact that, hey, this is why we think communism is bad, because this is what happened when people instituted it back in insert date here and insert country here. And understanding that and kind of hearing some of that historical perspective will help us generally understanding our history, not erasing it, and not erasing other people's history and understanding theirs will hopefully preclude us from making mistakes into the future. And that's kind of like the thing that you need to look at as far as that's concerned, and just being a little bit more open to different perspectives and at least hearing the perspective so that you can now have a more educated stance on it. Kind of what I will say, that's like what me and there's a guest that we had, Congressman Owens, he was talking about that. It's just like hearing a perspective that you disagree with makes you a more educated person, and just being able to stand hearing a differing perspective is a good thing from a societal a social standpoint. I don't know.
100%.
Amen.
Amen. Who's gonna win, Russia or Ukraine? What's winning?
Wow. Well,
next time.
So
next time.
Yeah, we could. I would say, I think we're probably getting close to somebody's going to need to start having some conversations soon, because there's going to be a breaking point at some point. But also, though,
yes,
there's there's been plenty of times where that's been said, but I do think without digging into it too much, I know that the Kursk incursion is happening at the moment, and it has been going on. But what I would say is I think that may actually be evidence of they're not necessarily getting straight into negotiations at the moment, but if you look at strengths and weaknesses, the one thing that the Russians have and have had against the Ukrainians this entire time and over most of the world is a massive manpower advantage. And so that is the main thing that's going to dictate staying power. And so if you see a whole lot of real estate get gobbled up inside of Russia, in and around Kursk, my first thought is, what is if they want to take that, they probably want to take that and hold on to that in the hopes that they can leverage it in negotiations to maybe get back some Russian territory or some Russian occupied territory that's been taken in Ukraine. So I think that is in and of itself an indication that we're getting to the point where there may be some negotiations, which I really hope that there are, because it's a meat grinder and it has been for a while.
Yes.
Yeah,
100% agree with that.
And that's the one where if Pinch and Kelso and the boys were on this, they'd be like, warfare is all about taking and holding territory. It's not necessarily just air power all the time. Very A10 perspective. But that's the thing, right? It's just like now that we are starting to see invasions across the, like when we say invasions across the border, like territory being taken on both sides. That's where negotiations can happen. Just be like, all right, cool. Are you going to stop? We'll stop if you stop. We'll give you this back if you give us this back. And kind of, I don't know. But history shows us that Russia will literally fight to the last man.
Correct.
And that's a scary place to be.
And that over time, and that they usually start slow and tend to improve over time, for sure. Has been generally the case for them. The one thing I'd also say too is, I do think that sometimes Western countries tend to put a lot of credence into, and this, I'm not saying there's nothing to it, into the psychological aspects of certain things, but this is my umbrage with information warfare as a term as well. Is like, it's really tough to measure success and really tough to then measure the cost when you do something like that too. It's the the idea of a Russian incursion with, I think the numbers that we've seen on class have all been like 4,000 to 6,000 guys. Not a lot of taking and holding, a lot of roving motorcycle gang kind of stuff. There's a psychological aspect to that, but that also has a double-edged sword to it. So there's, not to go back to Gladio, but that's a double-edged sword. That's what that means, right? The double-edged sword, a gladius, is in this case, right, you have a cost that you have to pay in the event that you're going to make that kind of incursion. Is it a psychological effect on the Russians right now, or is it a situation where, now you've just extended the negotiating out to where there's going to be a lot more bloodshed that needs to have happened before this ends, which is unfortunate.
And kind of to our point about the strategic empathy is, now when you look at it from the Russians' perspective, is did that give them a little bit of did that level out the moral playing field of the fact that Russia took parts of Ukraine? Well, hey, you now retaliated by taking parts of Russia. It's just like, you're now not on the defensive, you've gone offensive. And so now this is like, that's where you can almost justify escalation. And that's right. A little bit of the thing that scares me as well, that you can say is, it's like, hey, because they decided that offense is a better defense, they've gone on to this, and now they can potentially lose a little bit of the defensive morality, because the underdog and the person that's playing defense usually holds a little bit of a more higher position on the moral totem pole, and potentially you lose that. I don't know, but I still I have my perspective.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point, Flash. And to me, one of the compelling learning points to that is, was there a distinction between a land incursion of taking and holding territory? Now, whether they're a roving motorcycle gang or actually holding territory, there's a lot of questions on that. Or take even a smaller scaled strike with the drones that were going way inland to Russia, 700 800 kilometers in. Not as devastating in terms of the bloodletting, but now you're going into what I would call like terminal flying IED tactics into an adversary country. That to me is a very compelling. What does the future of warfare look like when you start to include like low cost terminal IEDs flying, right? Terminal flying IEDs into warfare. And how what is a depleted, a couple generation lost Ukrainian population think about this when this gets settled? That's going to be an interesting conversation when you start thinking about, like, we've had the Middle Eastern terrorism. Now can we get to Slavic terrorism? Because that gets a very bloody game. I've seen the movie Brat twice. I know it gets bad. So,
well, hey, the thing to consider too is it could be a precursor to negotiations if the Russians take it that way. But when you're dealing with, so I'll throw a term out there that I don't think gets discussed enough whenever folks are talking about, hey, can Ukraine do strikes deep inside of Russia? Should Ukraine get F-16s or anything like that? And that term is escalation dominance. And so who in that conflict has escalation dominance? And that ultimately is just who can go higher up the ladder, because we can continue to, okay, you took land, I took land. You struck my power grid, I strike your power grid. They can continue to do that, but to a certain point, the Russians have cards, whether we like it or not, that they haven't played yet, and that they have the ability to. And I really do worry deeply about the Ukrainians about that, because for all of the brutality of the conflict, if you look at how Russians have fought in other areas of the world, they haven't fought as brutally in Ukraine. And that's not to say that it hasn't been brutal, but they have not Aleppo'd Ukraine. They have not Grozny, Chechnya'd Ukraine. They haven't done any of that. And they've demonstrated that they have the ability, and under the right circumstances, they have the intent to do those kinds of things. And they haven't yet. And so you could see this as an off-ramp. If the Russians see it that way, it could also easily be an on-ramp further up the escalation ladder to something that the Ukrainians are not willing to withstand. And that is, after you've lost the amount of manpower that they have, that could be something catastrophic. It could be one of those slowly and then all of a sudden at once type of things.
Yep. And what you just did right there, Toad, is exactly what we were just talking about, is the fact that you said something that, like, hey, this hasn't been as brutal as it could be, while also understanding that war is fucking brutal. And so it's like, this is a horrible, horrible thing that is happening, but it can get worse. And that's what we're worried about, that these things could get worse. And then now, like, where is the line for NATO countries or the United States to actually, instead of supplying aid and weapons and things like that, and actually come to and actually come on their behalf, like,
and that's the even scarier aspect is, if Russia starts to trump Ukraine in the escalation ladder to a point where Ukraine can't continue to do it, the only thing that is nearby that can compensate for that is NATO. That's the only player yet to enter the game that could trump that card. But once that takes place, then it's kind of, we have no idea where that would go.
And this is one of the reasons why I love Toad's Substack here, and that's because he's done the thing that every intel person should do, or any person that should do that loves making predictions about geopolitics, is they have a log, right? They have a record of their balls and strikes of what they have out there. I would love to see, at some point, maybe this is an opportunity, but there needs to be, and because we don't do this in the geopolitical strategic sense ever that I've seen, and we should, and that is, let's look at some old takes from 2022 of what people were saying about how this was going to go, and let's debrief the shit out of those, because there's a lot of people out there that have had claims, and I didn't throw 100% strikes on any of this at the time either. But there's some claims out there that it'd be interesting to reattack. A few, as an example, that I've heard before is like, oh, well, we have to do this because this will show, this is going to show China what we really mean business with Taiwan. I was like, okay, so now that we've done this for 2 years, what did it show them? Like, what is the thing that actually ended up getting shown as the end state, and what is the thing that we maybe learned from all of this? That's just one thing to like debrief at certain takes that you've seen, that I've seen, that I've heard, that things that I've said myself too sometimes. But it's interesting to, I think you have to look back then too and say, like, how do we debrief ourselves on this, and where did it go wrong, and then why did we miss that big feature there? Because the one thing that sets us apart from other services is the debrief. Over.
Yep.
And from most countries, anybody that's trained with other countries know that. I mean, there's, I've been in some countries where they just absolutely refused to conduct a debrief because saving face was a higher priority than learning. And that's on tactical things that their lives were like literally just at risk for during what they were trying to accomplish, not even on big strategic things where thousands and thousands of lives were at risk.
I'll debrief myself right now. Getting in an elevator during a live podcast is not a good idea. Like that
you know what? Hey, on that, something that I would really recommend to anybody whenever it comes to debriefing these things, I would recommend 2 books, and this is a good learning thing, but then this is also kind of a depressing thing whenever it comes to lessons learned. We can think about, so probably the most studied, I would say, geopolitical, like a complete geopolitical debacle, is the Cuban Missile Crisis, and we really think that we understand it. There's 2 primary sources that you can look at to deeply understand how all of that went down. One of them is written by Graham Allison, and it was called The Essence of Decision. That book came out in the 1970s. Even when that book was written, a lot of the data wasn't there. And so you have Graham Allison, who, just by chance, he's also the guy that wrote the book about Destined for War, which came out in 2017. That was like the Indo-Pakam zeitgeist of everybody out there. You got to read this book to learn about China. That guy is very, very credentialed and very well connected, but even he didn't have enough data in the 70s to debrief the Cuban Missile Crisis. It wasn't until, I believe, 2005, there was a book that came out that was titled Blind Over Cuba. That book was an actual debrief after they got all of the completely declassified communications from the Kennedy administration and from the Soviet Union. So really, not until 2005 did we have a complete picture of the play-by-play and the thinking that went into the Cuban Missile Crisis, and that's the closest we have arguably come to nuclear war. Maybe there's an argument to be had for what happened in the Mediterranean in 1973 with the Israelis and DEFCON levels and whatnot, but that was over 40 years to even do that, and I don't even know that book in 2005 was released to a whole lot of fanfare or anything like that. But it takes us a long time, and there's a whole lot of competing interests that get in the way, because if you were to debrief these things, that would require humility and the willingness to accept accountability, and there are so many political narratives wrapped up in these things that can get in the way of conducting a thorough debrief. So but yeah, I would say The Essence of Decision and then Blind Over Cuba, those 2 books paired up, I would say that to deconstruct that event and try to learn how geopolitical catastrophes can unfold step by step, that book is, those 2 books together, you would learn, I would say, about as much as you would learn by slowly going and stumbling your way through the Peloponnesian War to try to understand these things. So,
absolutely. well, we've lost Zero about 3 different times. We went to another elevator, but we'll finish up the live stream. I think it's relatively successful. We got some people in the chat. I appreciate that. We're also going to record this thing, but Toad, LSU USC this weekend. LSU going to win? Muted.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, sorry, we still got a chair situation here. So no, LSU's gonna win. It's not gonna be pretty. but they're going to win. Lincoln Riley's in over his head. He's not Hollywood enough for that job. He already ran a soft team and a soft scheme in Oklahoma, but that passes for football in the Big 12, and now he's going to run right into an SEC defense that has been pumping out Heisman Trophy candidates, for as long as it takes. So I don't know. I think Oklahoma doesn't, or excuse me, I think USC doesn't really have much of a shot down there. Of course, Zero's asking about the spread.
Yeah, it's like, what's the spread?
Yeah.
There we go. I'll look, because Nebraska's got UTEP this weekend, and Air Force has Merrimack. I think Air Force has got.
It's tough.
LSU 4.5. LSU 4.5. 0. Gonna hammer that bet.
I would say that LSU is either winning by. There's no in between here. It's either they win by a field goal, or they win by 3 touchdowns.
Okay.
But there's. Yeah, I'm also
field goal then take USC, but.
Yeah, I'm also a giant homer, so. That's and then we're gonna have Darlington going on for all the fans of real motorsports, the non F1 variety. That's going to be going on also for anybody out there into that.
And if Bullseye Brown is out there listening, got Fox 3 for Dale, but for our motorsports alley. But yeah, Air Force versus Merrimack, Air Force by 30.5, and then Nebraska UTEP, Nebraska by 27.5. So I think that's I think those are 2 pretty safe bets for at least the teams that I follow. But dudes, thanks so much. Zero, sorry we lost you, brother. Thanks for all the folks that watched this. It was just unscripted for the most part, and kind of went from there. We'll do this a little bit more often. We'll have some other guests kind of coming on. This will be fun. And like I said, we'll just do a deep dive of just like we'll do Joe Rogan and Jamie style, where we just look at our photos and be like, hey, did you see this? Did you hear about this?
Yeah.
And we'll do current events, and we'll kind of just go around Toad's Substack. Speaking of that, I put Toad's Substack for Layman Geopolitics. You're right, Toad. You haven't written anything since July.
Thank you.
But you're welcome. You're welcome. I haven't written anything in like 2 years. I've said numerous times I'm going to write again. But I will say there's a lot of things on this computer that are written. Like I'll write it and I'll be like, oh, that's awful. That's not good. Nobody wants that.
Yeah.
But there you go. So. All right, y'all. We're gonna call this one good. Follow us. Gonna be a little bit more active on X going forward, and that'll be good. Rain. By the way, I do want to say Rain right now is in China. The man is in China. So gotcha. I got you, buddy. I'm thinking about you. You're out there doing the airlines work, but that's the man's doing right now. So all these things. Still flying to China, specifically Rain. So, all right, y'all, take it easy.
Yeah.
Dude.